All right, good morning and welcome to the Human Development and Relationships Institute Professional Development Series. This month is hosted by Lifespan Programs, and we will be having a panel on cultural approaches to aging. And our guest speakers today will be Dominic Ledesma, the Director of Office of Access, Inclusion, and Compliance with UW-Madison Division of Extension. We have Mai Zong Vu, the founder and board member of the Hmong Institute, Carolee Dodge Francis, Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, professor with the School of Human Ecology, UW-Madison, and Anna Karina Burton, an outreach patient navigator, bilingual, UW Health Breast Center, Wisconsin Well Women Program in the Southern region. So we're going to kick off today hearing from Dominic first. Dominic?
Good morning, Sarah and everyone. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge all of you and say thank you very much for including me today. I'm excited also to hear from and learn from our panel of speakers, and I'm really grateful to be here. I guess what I wanted to do was just to share a few thoughts on perhaps situating the topic and what we may hear today, or some of the perspectives that may be shared today. As we think about the perspectives, what it means for us, for our work, what it means for folks within Wisconsin, and what it means for potential questions that you may have of our community stakeholders. So today you're going to hear specific perspectives on aging communities, and you're going to hear this specifically from community stakeholders themselves, or folks who share group membership with said communities. One thing I think is important to keep in mind is that, each perspective from each person, is certainly situated within the uniqueness of their own community. So as we think about this today, the perspectives is that, any community is inherently diverse and rich with many different dimensions of identity. And so this is something to think about as we think about not necessarily a panacea for all aging communities across every different or specific or all communities, but just to think about the specific context in which perspectives are shared around aging populations. So one of the things that I think is important to think about today, which I suspect we'll hear more about, is about of course aging populations and age as an identity marker. But one of the things that I suspect that we'll also be talking about more fully and holistic today is the notion of eldership, which I think is something that is perhaps de-emphasized a little bit, at least within Western-based institutions or predominantly white institutions. In U.S. society, in broad terms, of course, age is an identity marker, but eldership is a little bit different. And eldership, of course, is associated with age, but it also affords individuals a particular social status within a community. And this is particularly true in communities from whom we have members today that stress and emphasize the importance of intergenerational relationships as a key component of community vitality. So it's not just within the family structure, but within the community and broader social structure as well, is that elders and the notion of eldership is a critical component to community vitality. So as you listen today to our panels, don't think of this more so as waiting in line to get your new tools and your instruction manual. Think about it as the opportunity to consult expert contractors who can help you build, who can help you think about the key aspects, the challenges and opportunities within whatever your programming looks like with aging populations. So with that, Sarah, I'll kick it back over to you. Again, thank you all very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Dominic. All right, we are going to start our panel with Mai Zong. She is a cultural trainer and folklore performer, including Hmong poetry, song, and storyteller since 1997. She is also an alumni of UW-Madison. Her advocacy and grassroots activism over the last 35 years has led to the development of Hmong and refugee women nonprofit agencies in Wisconsin and Georgia to provide human service, health and women's empowerment, and leadership services for refugee women. Refugee Family Strengthening Program, a domestic abuse program in Wisconsin, the Hmong Studies position at UW-Madison, the Hmong Language and Culture Enrichment Program, and the Hmong Institute. She has served on a variety of boards nationally that help improve the lives of others and volunteered in international efforts that aim to advance the status of women and children. Mai Zong has received numerous awards and honors for her tireless effort in serving the poor, including the YWCA of Dane County's Women of Distinction, Authentic Hmong Leaders and Trailblazers. Mai? Okay, maybe we are having a little bit of difficulties. Mai, are you on? Okay, maybe we'll just move on to our next speaker as we get things situated. Dr. Carol Lee Dodge Francis is a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin and is a Native American social behavioral researcher. She strives to intertwine community engagement and research scholarships as a reflection of her cultural understandings within a contemporary context that is focused upon the well-being of Indigenous populations. Dr. Dodge Francis has over 30 plus years of work experience in community wellness, public health, health education, program development, Indigenous evaluation, curriculum adaptation, and qualitative and community-based participatory research within urban and rural Native American communities nationwide. Dr. Dodge Francis is a principal investigator for a National Institute of Health grant and is also a published author. And I'll pull up your screen to share. So here's Dr. Carol Lee Dodge Francis.
I think you might be on mute.
Poso, everyone. Welcome for joining us this morning. My Menominee name is Nanahana Sutuki, and that means little lady. And while I am an enrolled member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, I actually grew up on the Menominee Reservation. Next. Sarah, am I able to move forward or do I just tell you next? Thank you. So the American Indian Alaska Native population has been growing over the last several decades. Currently, we represent about 2% of the United States population. So I'm giving you a little background context because it helps to understand where we are with regard to our aging population. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the profiles of Native Americans. So we have over 574 federally recognized tribes across the nation. And there's about over 100 state recognized tribes. Well, people think that the majority of us live on reservation. The fact of the matter is the majority of us live in metropolitan areas or off reservations, and only about 22% live on reservations. We've seen a huge growth in life expectancy over the years. Back in the 40s and the 50s, life expectancy for Native Americans was about 50 years of age. However, in the past few years. From 2000 to 2010, the number of Native Americans 65 or older has increased by 40%. So now we're seeing a larger amount of Native Americans in our elderly population, similar to that of the baby boomers. Our health disparities is 3 times more likely in regard to type 2 diabetes, 3 times more likely than non-Hispanic white adults to be diagnosed. And this brings along with its own comorbidity issues related to an aging population. We're also about 2.5 times more likely to die from diabetes. And it really is the complications of diabetes, those associated with heart disease, amputation, renal failure. I want to talk a little bit about also food insecurity. Food insecurity has been a common issue for us for generations. Well, many of us who might live in metropolitan areas, our populations often live in areas that are considered food deserts. So meaning that access to good health foods, nutritious foods is usually out of our reach. And while we might live in metropolitan areas, transportation times is an issue associated with garnering better foods for our families. On reservations, oftentimes we have to travel to grocery stores that are off reservations, which means, again, transportation becomes an issue with acquiring foods. So when you have 574 federally recognized tribes, food insecurity is not the same across the board, and it looks differently across the board. The same with health disparities. For some tribes, with regard to diabetes and health disparities, we can see anywhere from 50% of the elderly population diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is a epidemic proportions, and of all the populations, we have the highest rates. So food insecurity plays an important trigger with type 2 diabetes, because if you have food insecurity, oftentimes then you are looking to find foods to feed a family, but also you end up looking at more foods that are processed, have higher carbohydrates, and that's not a good mix with the health disparities that exist within our population. Next slide, please. So these are my parents. My father is just turned 93 years old. He's a World War II vet, and my mother is 89. So in the age of COVID, it has made elder caregiving a bit more trying and difficult during this time. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the care systems that oftentimes Native Americans try to access. And oops, backslide. The healthcare services that we want to look at is the Older American Act, OAA, which was authorized to protect the well-being of older Americans. And it really looked at promoting community home-based services to support independent living and physical and mental health, suitable housing, and even restoration of some of that housing that needed it. It also looked at institutional care and retirement. And basically the mantra of Older American Act, OAA, was health, honor, and dignity. In 1978, this act was amended to include home and community-based supportive services for older American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian populations. It recognized that older AIANs and Native Hawaiians are a vital resource entitled to all benefits and services that are available through this act. It too, Title VI, it too provided nutrition and supportive services for our elderly, congregate and home delivered meals. It's interesting to note that many of the senior centers on reservations have meals, noon meals, usually 11 to 1. My parents participate in that. But it's a place for socialization of our elders, and oftentimes transportation is also provided. In their case, up until recently, they used to drive, but now they get delivery of meals at home. Title VI provided not only meals and transportation, but also referral services, and at times also provided caregiving services for individuals of elders, and also for elders who were taking care of grandchildren. I talk about these different healthcare services is because we have kind of a patchwork of services that we try to access. Veterans Affairs, approximately about 1% of the veterans in the United States are Native American. Those, however, oftentimes Veteran Affairs Administration services, whether that's hospital or clinics, is usually far away from reservations, and they are not able to access them, again, due to transportation. The Indian Health Service, it's a delivery system for Native Americans. Now, originally when Indian Health Service first came on scene, it was looking more at hospitalization and acute care. And now, since our Native American population has gotten older, we are looking at other ways in which to look at more of the assisted living and long care. Next slide, please. This was just recently in March when we celebrated my father's 93rd birthday on the Menominee Reservation. So some of the cultural values and norms in regard to elder care for our population have not always been investigated thoroughly. And of course, with so many federally recognized nations, one does not fit all of the tribes. But some of the things that generationally we have been taught are the fact that food sharing is one of the greatest components to ensuring that our wisdom keepers, our elder population and our younger population, and the population through the lifespan has food available to them. I recall that oftentimes it was rare that we had dinner with just the immediate family, because people knew that typically if they showed up at dinner time, we would make space at the table and share whatever food we had. Now, understand, we were not by any means had a high economic status. We gardened, we fished, we hunted. But it is very customary for Native American indigenous people to share meals with people. In fact, so much so, sometimes when individuals even go to hospitals or assisted living or nursing homes, and people come to visit, it's typical if a meal's being served that they will offer that food to those that are in the room. To decline food from Native Americans is usually unacceptable in our population. It's a way of trust building and relationship building. So keep in mind, as healthcare professionals work in community and they look at more and more and go to homes, oftentimes they will be offered food, and it might not be traditional food, it might be something that's packaged, it might just be food that they have in the house. But to share meals brings a true sense of our beliefs, our cultural values and norms, that we want to ensure basically that all people have food available to them. Oftentimes, I thought about this for a long time, but sometimes Native American have a very dry sense of humor. So perhaps when a caregiver comes in or a healthcare professional comes in, and I've seen this happen with my father, and they'll say, "Well, how are you today, Mr. Dodge?" And he'll say, "Oh, I'm great, I'm wonderful." Other people who might be in a hospital setting would probably say, well, this is how I feel in regard to my illness or my sickness. Native American people oftentimes don't complain about the reality of their physical illness. And so you need to keep in mind that sometimes you have to ask really specific questions because they like to tease you. And oftentimes their mannerism of teasing you makes you think that they're serious, when in fact they're actually teasing you. So in regard to spirituality, it's another area that's really important. Not all of us, because of some of the historical trauma that came with assimilation and wanting generations, especially the older generations, to not speak, not practice their culture and their languages. And that includes spirituality. And so it varies from in family to family. Like any family, probably the most important thing, like other elder populations, they want to stay at home. They want to live at home. So spirituality, in some sense, comes to the makeup of the family network and the community network and the community holding those elders in a high reverence as to trying to make sure that they are able to stay home as long as possible. This being said, as in the original slide, when you look at the sudden growth in our elderly population, it gives pause to think about family caregivers and the fact that family caregivers may be burnt out. How do we create networks? We have a patchwork of healthcare services from VA to Indian Health Service to the OAA Act. So one of the things that I find that we really need to think about is how do we put together the healthcare services? How do we respectfully and culturally add humility to our elderly population, our wisdom keepers, in regard to letting them stay at home if at all possible? And how do we maintain that? The majority of reservations do not have assisted living or long-term home health, long-term nursing homes. Typically, you have to go off reservation to another nearby town to achieve that. So keeping all these things in mind as we enter a new age of lifespan for our Native American population will give pause to many of us. I appreciate you listening to me, Wilwan, and thank you, and look forward to your questions at the end.
Sorry, I did not mean to stop screen sharing.
Okay.
I'm trying to mute somebody on the phone. Can you please mute your lines? And I'm struggling. So if you had more to say, I did not mean to cut you off like that.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I can answer questions at the end.
Yeah. All right. Sorry about that again. Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Anna Karina. She is the Patient Navigator Outreach Coordinator for UW Health and Wisconsin Well Women Program since 2018. She provides community outreach and health education on breast and cervical cancer screening by providing support, connecting women to resources, addressing barriers, and facilitating access to care. Prior to her position as the patient navigator, Anna Karina was a standards manager for the Wisconsin Association of Free and Charitable Clinics and an AmeriCorps Vista for the Multicultural Outreach Program. Anna Karina is originally from Colombia. She earned her bachelor's in psychology from Universidad del Valle, Colombia, and a master's degree in social work from Clark University. Anna Karina?
Hello, good morning.
Hello and
Thank you.
welcome. Yep, I can hear you great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So I'm so glad to be here today. And I just want to talk a little bit about the cultural approach of aging in the Hispanic community. But before to speak about that, I would like to give like a little context about the culture, the values of the Latin culture, so we understand a little bit about aging in our community. So I want to say that the Latino culture is a family-oriented and a collectivist culture. So there is a strong family orientation about the Latinos. Also, the family model is a extended one. So grandparents, aunts, cousins, even people that are not biologically related may be considered part of the family. And also the financial support of the family by the individual and the individual to the family is very important and expected. And also Latinos place a high value on demonstrating respect and interaction with others. And also the generational hierarchy is expected. Now, with this overview about the Latin values, to gain an understanding of the Latin views of aging, there is a couple of words that come to mind when Latinos see the word aging. One of the words are wisdom and experience. So older individuals have a life experience in which Latinos show respect. Also love. Satisfactory aging means for Latinos to be with the loved ones. So families take care of me no matter what happens. And also spirituality and religious are very important. And also means like you are a financial independent, you work hard all your life, so it's time to retirement, enjoy your time with your family and your kids, grandchildren's. And also the perception of aging is influenced by the level and quality of social support, also the fulfill of cultural expectations and having a strong faith in God. So these factors seem to influence the sense of emotional well-being despite the physical, functional, or any health conditions. The most report concerns are the fears of loneliness and the prospect of living in nursing homes between the older Latinos. That's the more concerns things. Also, the Hispanics view aging as a series of life accomplishments, not only economic resources. Also, because we are a collectivistic culture, we see that family members need to take care other family members in times of need. So care should be provided by family member, not by an outsider. So it's not okay for children to place their elderly parents in a nursing home for proper care. So taking care of our parents is expected and is customary in the Spanish culture. Sometimes because of this can be a lot of caregiver burden, sense of obligation in adult children toward their aging parents can create some conflicts, family stress. If there is a distance between families, there also can be a little burden between the families. And now I just want to tell a little bit about best practice when you communicate with older Hispanic adults. So it's very important that the services providers have somebody that speaks Spanish. Is very important, or at least to have somebody that translate. Also, public agencies have to have in consideration that Latinos are from different countries, and the status of Latinos can be very different. So some immigrants, maybe they didn't work enough and not have enough years to qualify for Social Security and Medicare benefits. Others are undocumented. So others are permanent residents, so some can be in visa, so can be a different immigration status between them. Also, many other Latinos return to the country of origin when they become old or sick. Other thing that is important is that work collaborative with the Latinos is in their families is very important for retention and success of care. All this means that sometimes Latinos respect authority if they feel that are misunderstood and not connect to a provider or agency, they will drop out from services. So it's important always engage the family members in the care and in decision making. And Latinos place high value and respect in interaction with others, especially authority figures. So sometimes you see that they listen, they don't ask questions, but it's because providers or especially doctors are figures that we respect. And also always using appropriate titles to respect when you talk with Latinos. For example, Señor, Mr., Señora, Miss. Say good, greetings, appropriate greetings, good morning, good afternoon. This is very important for older Latinos because older Latinos don't appreciate that formality that most of the times Americans do. So they can make them a little uncomfortable. Even they can be seen this as a rude behavior in certain situations. Also, Latinos are very relaxed with time. They see time as a flexible, and sometimes punctuality is something to concern. But sometimes providers can use this, educate them in a way that they, show up on time by saying, well, you are late, you are showing respect to the doctor. So with this kind of conversations, this will change. And I think so that's a little like overview. I just want to say also that Latinos patients, sometimes they believe that chronic disease is like a death sentence because fatalismo. They may prefer not to know if they have cancer or think that this is God's punishment or nothing that they can do about it. So sometimes they can be less to seek preventive screening services or see the doctor until symptoms are very severe. So we have to work with them in certain ways so they understand that this is not correct, but this is the general idea. So yeah, this is a little, a good practice when you're working with Latinos. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we will actually just we'll open up the chat, or if you want to unmute your mic and ask some questions, we'll start taking some questions right now for either one of the speakers. So either Dominic, Ana Karina, or Dr. Carolee Dodge Francis. Somebody in the chat says, Ana, will you please repeat what you said about good morning?
Yes, so what I try to say is that for older Latinos especially, it's very important when you see them, always use like if it's in the morning, like good morning, good afternoon, Mr. or Mrs. It's very important, the formality. Like sometimes we kind of skip these things and they can be seen as a rude. That's what I try to say with the importance of good morning, good afternoon, of greetings. Very important for Latinos, especially the older ones.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi to both of you. This is Kristen Litzelman. I'm not sure, I want to make sure you can hear me because I was muted and now I'm not. We're good, I'm getting nods. Okay. So this is actually a question for both of you. Sorry, you hear my child screaming in the background. What I am wondering is if you could talk just a little bit more about the ways that our current services serve or maybe underserve elders and family caregivers in your communities. And I have that in mind because I know that in general, families really struggle with accessing services and getting even resources that we with an extension provide in terms of education and connection to those community meal sites. And so if you could just talk a little bit about the ways that maybe we through extension could potentially help to make that connection with these more diverse communities, that might shed some light on the steps that we can take to help move forward and help make our services more inclusive.
This is Carolee. I can go first. So oftentimes, if there's an Indian Health Service clinic, whether that's metropolitan, urban, or on reservation, that's usually the first stop for many of our families to go in regard to getting care for our elderly population. And that might be in the form of community health workers, nursing, doing referrals to some of the healthcare professionals, if it's PT or speech therapy. And the thing is trying to navigate all of that becomes not only for our population, for all populations, the ins and outs of our healthcare. I think particularly in the Native American population, because we have a couple different points of healthcare access, Indian Health Service, also veterans. But if you live in an area that the Indian Health Service healthcare system is not readily available, that then entails a very large concern, because oftentimes families might forego it. And I'll just give you an example. Having just moved from Las Vegas, Nevada, we have a clinic within the city of Las Vegas, Nevada, the Paiute Clinic, but it serves the Paiute tribal members, not other tribal members. So the closest access to an Indian Health Service clinic is in Phoenix. Well, that's a heck of a long drive from Las Vegas to Phoenix, Arizona. So I think sometimes transportation is a huge issue with accessing healthcare. If the availability of having Indian Health Service healthcare facilities nearby alleviates some of that, because they can help maneuver with it. But sometimes I think it's also the fact that people just don't know what questions to ask in regard to healthcare for our elderly population. And so I think there needs to be some more education, because as family members become more of the core of the caregiving team, we need to be able to know what our options are or what's available in our areas. And so, and to be able to really talk the lingo of the healthcare systems, because that's very important. And then you throw in that mix Medicare. And I was reading some of my parents' Medicare documentation they were sending, and I can see where our population gets confused. Some of it was confusing for me. So I think there needs to be some education as in regard to the healthcare systems that are available. How does Medicare operate hand in hand with some of our Indian Health Services? How does it operate in private? So it's a lot to manage, and I've had firsthand experience just recently, because my mother was in Florida, fell and broke her hip. So I didn't understand, I understood hospitalization. I didn't understand how the transfer to acute care worked. So as our population ages and we have more comorbidities related with this population, I think that all of us in community, in tribal community, but especially for families, have a better grasp of how we maneuver the systems and how do we get to understand the language that's behind those systems. Because right now, a lot of times, it's pretty much a mystery at times and frustrating. Thank you.
Okay. There is another question in the chat too. from Nikki, and it says, how do we coordinate public and tribal health if both are serving a family member? If they see us as intrusive if we are around during home visits, but this is the native way, so it can be frustrating.
So can I actually respond in general? It kind of connects a few comments to what has been said, and also talk specifically within this question that you just read
Sure.
from Nick.
Sure.
So just putting this in context, thinking about what Ana Karina mentioned about, a collectivist approach, or a more collectivist social structure. One of the things I think is important to understand is that another person, a family member, a relation, someone who's there, differing perspectives of looking at someone as intrusive. If you're not the patient there, why are you in the room or asking questions? This is normatized within specific communities in terms of providing specific support for the person who's receiving care in this instance. And that is also becomes more amplified within specific communities where elders are perhaps immigrants, and may be dominant in a language other than English, where the support person is not just helping, doing their ability in caring for an individual, but also helping decode and interpret the language of these systems, or the language that's embedded within these systems, that where language can serve both as a primary barrier for an individual, but it also can compound other types of barriers, like a person's limited access to understanding systemic structures, whether it's Medicare or how benefits work. So just thinking about that, I just wanted to highlight the importance of talking about this as it relates specifically with an extension. If we consider how additional people support people and make it easier for folks to come to our programming, that is an important strategy that provides comfort for participants who have been historically underserved. But it also provides a unique way to expand our reach and expand access for underserved populations through extension programs. And one example that I'll also use is within our the Organic Vegetable Producers Conference in Wisconsin, that's held in Madison every year. There's a strategy that we've employed that has seemed to work well, where during the registration, of course, this is a conference for producers of organic vegetables, which includes a local concentration of Hmong producers. But within the registration forms, we have allowed, not just a one-to-one registrant that pays the fee, but have also worked to say within the registration forms that an additional person can register for free. Because what we find out is that folks will not just, typically show up in a new space alone or as an individual, but are more likely to show up if they're able to bring someone who's there as a support person. And I use the term support person loosely because it's typically what it could be, is a younger person, a child, it could be a friend, but really the point that I'm making here is to seeing how scaffolded social support, particularly navigating in new situations, particularly within communities of color, who are not typically within these spaces already, that is a way to comfortably lean into new spaces where they don't have to do it alone, but are able to do that within the comforts and confines of having existing relations with them in that space.
I think in regard to Nikki's question too, I think it is not the norm. I've done some research in caregiving in other populations, and nursing homes or assisted living is not the norm for us. That's not our first option. Our first option is to either keep the parent or grandparents within their own dwelling or bring them into our family. We're much more used to having multiple generations living within our house, our structure. So I think that oftentimes, because we also have less of our population in the healthcare field, that oftentimes healthcare providers or systems that are outside of our geographical area, tribal reservation, don't understand that, you know, our first goal is not to put them into a nursing home, but our first goal is to make sure and to act as that liaison within the family to make sure that care is provided and services are provided. So I think it's on both sides. Well, we need to learn systems, healthcare systems from a family nucleus. And on the other side, healthcare professionals and providers need to understand that there's the need for cultural humility in working with populations, underrepresented populations may not look like the Western model of medicine. And so, and that comes from both a cultural aspect, but also from a family community, network of how we work together to ensure the well-being of all generations within our community. So it's, I would say it's a learning curve on both sides. And I think that the COVID has definitely ramped that up, because now we're looking at COVID tracing and tracking, and how that looks and how that will interact is going to be an important step in understanding that we can't just have a cookie cutter type of programming for COVID tracing that fits all populations across the United States. It won't work. And I think it will cause more fear amongst populations when it comes to public health or health officials outside of the parameter of our typical tribal healthcare providers. So I think, Nikki, as much humility and grace that we can have on both sides to try to explain our cultural beliefs and norms, and hopefully that healthcare professionals will also understand that this is our way, this is our traditional way of how we take care of our own people, whether it's young children or if it's our grandparents. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question that came into the chat is for all the panelists, and it's how does your culture view caregiving, or is that just something that is an expectation and it's not viewed as maybe that playing that formal caregiver role within a family?
I can go. It's interesting because this was part of my research years ago on caregiving. For us, that's just part of who we are. That's just part of our culture. I mean, it's not like, oh my gosh, who can I pawn this off on? This is about, when I say intergenerational and generations, that this is passed on cultural norms and beliefs. This is an expectation that all family members have, that caregiving will be done through the family as much as possible to keep these individuals well and loved and at home, whether that's within our own homes or whether it's in their homes. But it's a different type of structure. And some of the research that I did with some colleagues was that what we found in the Asian populations, it was very similar. It wasn't about a discussion of, how is this going to happen? It was a discussion about, okay, how do we make this happen? Or who's going to do it? It's how all of us collectively work to make this happen. And I think we're seeing that much more. It's a little bit more difficult with the stay at home, stay in place in COVID. But I think all of us are adapting to how we make that happen, and so that we ensure that our elderly are taken care of. But for us, there have always been grandparents in our family, in our homes, to my father's mother, to my mother's mother, living with us, because it's not an expectation. It just is the way we are culturally and traditionally. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna Karina? I see. She's on.
Yes.
How does your culture view caregiving, or is it something that's just they just do it and it's not really considered caregiving or really a role that they're taking on? It's just a part of life.
Yes, it's a part of our culture, just how I explained before. Yes, we are expected and we take care of our family. We just do it. It's just generation by generation. Our family take care of us when we were little. So now is our way to return to take care of them. So it's just part of our culture and like our way to do it, like an obligation for our family. And it's just the way how the Latin culture function.
Okay, thank you. And then Dominic, there is a question in the chat for you. Can you please talk more about eldership and what your observations about the way the majority culture views its elders compared to how other cultures view their elders?
Sure. We're hearing it right now. And that's just what I want to acknowledge here by both Dr. Dodge Francis and Ana Karina, by saying that, you know, that this is an expectation. Like, our elders are an extension of who we are. And, you know, this is very in contrast to mainstream Western society views, right? That first it's the family's responsibility, it's ours, it's who we are, it's the way we are, it's the way we, it's our way of being, it's our way of knowing, it's our way of caring, it's our way of giving back to honor the folks who have taken care of us. So this is what we're talking about when elderships are, it's not just, oh, gotten to this age, okay, retired, and then move on to the next stage. Like, elders are constantly seen as again, as I mentioned, you know, initially, as an integral part of community vitality and the sustainability of intergenerational relationships, intergenerational values, and how information, knowledge is passed on, shared, and how not only within the family structure, within the community structure, of how folks care for each other. So this is the way that I would say that's the primary, and it's what you're hearing, is that in many respects, like, this is just the way things are because this is how we are. And so sometimes we'd be like, oh, okay, we see that as like that's a little bit different. No, but in contrast to Western views of U.S. mainstream society, this is very different, but it's also very normatized within specific communities that we've heard from multiple stakeholders here today. Another thing, I guess, with different views, you know, about to acknowledge also, you know, the formality of addressing folks, of saying hello, the use of humor. Those are the sorts of things where can kind of become overshadowed within the conversation today. We're talking about healthcare providing institutions, but just to acknowledge that of how individuals can use humor, using social protocols, if you will, of acknowledging folks, of showing respect through titles such as Señor, Señora, Mr., Mrs., what have you. A shared language. Dr. Dodge Francis, you know, greeted everyone in Menominee, hello today. So just applying that to different models of, like, if someone you know that speaks a language other than English, who has that as a part of who they are and their being and their identities, then it is absolutely appropriate and a form of respect to express those social courtesies with them. So I just think that's important. I think a lot of the things that we're talking about, at least with that question, you know, we're talking about those things right now, and just acknowledging those little nuggets to understand that of how, if we're not looking for them or noticing them, they can become overshadowed by the predominance of Western dominant views, Western dominant values that are in many spaces, but not all, an integral part of U.S. society, mainstream U.S. society.
Thank you, Dominic. I'm actually just going to take a pause in questions for a moment and let our third panelist, Mai Zong Vu from the Hmong Institute, speak a little bit about the Hmong culture. Mai?
Hi,
Hi!
how are you?
Great, thank you for joining us today.
Sure.
So thanks for having me too. I'm not sure how much time we have, but for this discussion, I can just give you a very quick overview and then just open up for Q&A. I think that's the best way for people to learn. So again, I'm Mai Zhang Vu, and I'm the board president from the Hmong Institute. So thanks for having me. As many of you know, Wisconsin is the third largest home for Hmong in the United States. So we have over 50,000 Hmong in Wisconsin. And unlike the Twin City, where things are clustered in the Twin Cities, we are spread out in a cluster about 15 counties. And so like in the Fox City area, you have the Green Bay, Appleton, Oshkosh, Sheboygan, Manitowoc cluster, Neenah, Menasha. And then you go up to Wausau. There's a large community up in Wausau. Then moving down to Stevens Point, Wisconsin Rapid, La Crosse, Madison, Sheboygan, and Milwaukee. So, visual-wise, that's kind of where we are in Wisconsin. This year marks 45 years of Hmong diaspora, and we have a whole series that was planned out, but then has been postponed because of COVID-19. As far as the Hmong culture, I think when we talk about aging in the Hmong community, things to keep in mind are, I heard respect, right? We put our elder in a pedestal. We have a saying in Hmong that the older people eat more spoonful of rice, meaning that they have more experience and they know what they're talking about. So we value experience and age. And so aging in our community, now, things are kind of being what I call in full acculturation mode, where a lot of the intersection of their children having to go away for a job and they no longer are with their mom and dad. So they may not have the full spectrum of care the way, their grandparents would have, meaning that, our elders are not getting the respect that they deserve because of all the different elements that comes in. But respect is still a great thing that we put in. So within the family structure, you would still have, family that are 2-3 generations together. Those, they still, have a lot of respect for their elders. For some, because of inconvenience of job and all of that, they may not have that kind of practice. So it all depends. But still, in general, elders are held, with respect. And when we respect them, that means we give them the best piece of the chicken, like the chicken breast when we eat, right? We serve them first. We consult them, so that's what we talked about when we say respect. In the Hmong family structure itself, we have a structure that is combined with age and birth orders. So if I'm born the first son, my role is to be the leader in the household. If I'm born the last son, my role is to be the retirement fund for my parents because they are expected to live with me and I, need to take care of them. So there's that whole birth order that I won't be able to give in detail, but in general, we have that kind of culture that's happening in the family that we also need our, kids to know and the mainstream to know. The other piece that when we talk about aging is, right now we're going through, again, this whole intersection of acculturation in full. So while the elders and they view aging as a normal process, they accept the fact that death is coming. However, we don't talk about that. And that's a piece that makes it really complicated for people, because so if I have my mom and dad are not with us anymore, but you know, for example, when they're sick and they're in a hospital, we know they're heading to the deathbed, and we prepare their death clothes for them, but we won't talk about it, you know. And so if you're helping, you know, the elder, you need to know that, because we believe that if you speak, then the spirits. So I'll take you back to in terms of belief. So, you know, for us, we believe that we live in conjunction with a world that is seen, which is the one that we live in, and then a unseen world, which is the other side, the darkness. And so if you speak about it, then the, you know, spirits on the dark side would hear about it. So that's why we don't speak about it, but we prepare the death clothes for them, for example. So for aging, we accept birth and we accept death. What we do in between is the part that's complicated, and people, you know, don't know about that. But some of the things that we're doing right now that I think it's really hard for our elder is that right now we are that first generation where we have to put our elder in, you know, adult daycare or in nursing home and all of that, because again, of the employment situation, the economic situation, where unlike in the 80s where my mom and dad could still help my grandma at home, now, you know, all the adults are working and they can't, you know, help their grandma and grandpa. So we have no choice, but like many people in the community, you have to put your elder in the nursing home. And we're crossing this new turning point in our life in the community where elder felt very disrespectful. And on top of that, when they are in the mainstream setting, the nursing home doesn't know that food, you know, is an issue. We all grown up to eat the food that we like, right? So instead of giving them bread, they need to give them rice to make them, you know, feel like they are able to live because they could still enjoy the rice rather than forcing bread on them. So food example is, you know, a good example. Communication, right? You go to a place where most of the people don't look like you and they don't speak your language. So the isolation is another huge thing. The culture, again, you know, all the activities, all the stories are not relevant to you. So you're left out, you know. So this is a whole spectrum in adult care that we haven't talked about, but we are in this intersection right now that is really hard for our elders. And the health issue, you know, take that to the next level, right? If you have diabetic and you're in a nursing home, how do you even, you know, get your needs met, basic needs on top of your medical needs? So I will leave, yeah, I'll stop there and see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a couple questions in the chat, just in general, so for any of the panelists. But one person said, I am curious to know how the pandemic has impacted older adults and their care, and how communities have continued to care for elders during this time of physical distancing.
I could share what's happening in our community. So in Madison here, we have the Monkashire program, which is a mental health program, and we have an elder care program there. Some of the things that we're seeing is that there's a large, overwhelming feeling of confusion, lack of information, because a lot of these information are passed on in English, and many of the elders, don't read, so they don't understand what's happening. On top of that, we have some component of internal communication via radio program and things like that, and the elder listen to that a lot, but there's so much information coming out of there that sometimes they don't know when is it that people are advertising to sell them things compared to real information, right? And so that's really overwhelming for them. The other piece is the social isolation, a good thing, for this, but not a good thing for elders, because for our program, we are a community center, so they come to the community, and now they are forced to stay home. So they're saying they're back to seeing life from the inside of the window again, and they can't interact with their peers. So this has brought in a lot of relapse in trauma and PTSD for them, because it's taking them and trigger back to the war when they were running from the enemies and they were starving. So, for example, people are rushed to get rice because they feel like, okay, we're going to be starved if we don't get rice, and make sure that we have rice here. So mentally and physically, it's impacting our elders a lot.
There's always resources. I think those resources, though, would be connected. Can you hold on a minute?
Oops, I don't think that was meant for us. Did any of the other panelists have any insight to how the COVID has impacted their communities and how older adults are cared for?
Yes, I can share a little bit about the Hispanic community and in the COVID-19. So there is a lot of doubts. Many people, don't know what to do. Many things are in English. I'm glad that a couple of things have been coming in Spanish, but it still is very uncertain that what is going on. Also, they are feeling lonely, isolated, because part of our community is to be together, talk to your neighbor, with your family, and now they can do that because they are more in risk for getting the virus and maybe, get complications of that. So many of them feel like lonely, isolated. So one of the things that people is doing is making phone calls, talk to them in the phone, that help a little bit with that emotional part. Also, like even with I work with some adults and older adults, and even that I work more with cervical cancer screening education. I have been receiving calls about just listen to them, help them with resources. For example, they cannot see the doctor because of the rates. So doing like the telemedicine help a lot. Like family members had to help them with the technology part, but I think so that's have been very successful. Like some of our clinics or free clinics having provide this, the telemedicine, and is helping them because many of them need medications because they have diabetes. They need to see the doctor because of their health complaints. So these have been very helpful. But yeah, the Latin community, they need a little support, especially in this time. Like I have people that have been calling me like, I need to see the dentist, but there is no dentals right now available. So kind of connect them with these institutions. Like it's a lot of phone calls, connect them, be sure that they're getting the service that they need. And that emotional part is very important, that piece, because they feel disconnected, isolated too.
This is Carolee. So I think the individuals, our tribal clinics are still open because they're seen as essential workers and they're still seeing tribal people through the clinics. I think also, though, that family members are helping, assisting more, making food, leaving it doors, talking to each other via phone, talking with our parents and grandparents more. But it is very isolating for them because they're used to going to the senior centers and having their lunches. For many, lunches are now being brought to them, kind of like Meals on Wheels. And I think, just going to the post office was always on our reservation, the place to kind of catch up on everybody and see what's going on, but we don't do that as much anymore. So I think as it's been said, that it is isolating. It has caused some isolation, and sometimes even for our elderly parents or grandparents, we didn't touch about, but some of the issues of dementia and Alzheimer's, and not really understanding why they can't socialize or why family members can't come and visit. Because even though you might live in another town, the norm is on weekends you get together and you have a meal, and you celebrate birthdays and holidays together. So I think that there's a mix of not only mental health but physical health needs that are impacting our populations at a great extent. And we're learning as we go through this pandemic as to how we can ensure that our elders are taken care of the best possible way, even though we can't physically be there all the time with them. So it is truly a new era in caregiving from a distance, from a family nucleus, and stressful for all families. But I think for us, because as it's been talked about, collectively we've always done caregiving, this added barrier has really caused some interesting ways to connect with each other that we typically haven't in the past. So yes, I'm hoping that we can make sure that we think about this as we move forward, and keep in mind some of the creative ways, interventions we've been working with family. I told Dominic earlier before the call started that I become the reading specialist for my grandchildren, and I purchase books on Amazon on Kindle, and then I can share the screen just like on Zoom so that he can read with me. So how do we connect together and make it work so that we still stay close as a family? Thank you.
I guess what I would add, and I'm speaking first about with extension, is that extension that our office has a language access team. So as we have resources, as we have information that a lot of program managers and institute directors are seeing as critical, or being identified as critical priority or vital information for communities, that we do have a team that focuses on creating multilingual materials. So that is one piece. Now that is in contrast to recognizing that information on many levels is only available in English. It privileges English dominant speakers, or speakers of English, where even just having information available is limited for folks who speak languages, who are dominant to language other than English. But we have a specific mechanism here within Extension to help address that in ways that are not being done elsewhere in other spaces. When I say local level, I'm talking about Extension as an organization that has a statewide presence. And so everyone in Extension should know that they have that support from our office to be able to meet needs as appropriate. What I'll also mention is that, as we know that the information is only as good as the source that it comes from. And so there are two things that we need to consider when it comes down to reaching diverse populations. If a language other than English is an integral part of their social identity and their social ties. And thinking about these, that just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, but as we we're thinking about how we mobilize information and resources to fill in gaps. And in a lot of places, at least there are some, well, let me switch back to what I was going to say, is that so we need to think about, as we think about communication, the need for multilingual communication, and both strategies that are culturally responsive and that are also linguistically appropriate. For example, you know, thinking about, oh, we just developed this website and we have all this text, this information, narrative bullet points, you know, let's turn it into Spanish or another language. You know, there's also a cause to pause and to think about what type of information meets the needs for the communities based on who we're trying to serve with it, its intended audience, and what is the delivery mechanism that we need to think about. And I'm proud to share that with our colleagues around the state. We're working on a variety of different pieces of information and resources from Extension that helps address not only, you know, the issues of what language something is, you know, information is in, but the delivery mode of how we can use that and deliver it in a way that reaches communities. So working on developing videos around taking care of self. Looking at other ways of borrowing what is out there when we look at folks who are professionals, who have a professional authority, who are able to deliver messages and information in languages other than English. Thinking about a physician out of Wausau who, on behalf of CDC, made a video talking about the basics of COVID-19 in Hmong that was specifically directed for Hmong communities. It's Dr. Kevin Tao out of Marathon County. So we just think about this. There's an intentional approach to meet some of these gaps that are important. Talking specifically about COVID-19, talking specifically about Spanish-speaking populations, primarily immigrant populations here in the States. You know, COVID-19 has affected and impacted everyone in the same way, but for immigrant Spanish-speaking communities that I'm talking about specifically here, there are additional and even steeper challenges of not just getting information, but if your work in your life is disrupted because, let's say, a restaurant is closed, or because, you know, the dairy industry is coming to a halt in certain areas. You know, this creates huge disruptions in the lives of individuals, and even more so for folks who may be living in undocumented status here within the States. And so just keeping in mind with that, there are multiple impacts of COVID-19 that impact all communities. But the harder impacts of this are often felt by folks who are already at a social disadvantage when it comes to accessing information, when it comes to being able to access resources and community supports, not just within specific areas, but across the states. So food insecurity is big. Worrying about income, worrying about, you know, what benefits folks may or may not be eligible for from assistance from federal sources. So we need to be mindful of this, is that COVID-19 has some serious disruptions to folks, like in their work schedule, like maybe it's a single person household. So work schedule, if work is canceled, now they're not able to take care of their children or to ensure that they're cared for as well. So number of different challenges in all the same ways and additional ways that we come back to saying mainstream US society is dealing with right now as a whole.
Thank you. I have two more questions. I'm going to ask a quick question that's pretty much for Dominic. Somebody asked about American Sign Language and if there is a need expressed by deaf and hard of hearing people in Wisconsin, and how that program delivery, if that's included within, I believe within your office, if that's.
It is, and I'll spare the details, but Heather Stelgis is our ADA consultant. Heather has a shared appointment with both Extension and UW-Madison campus with the McBurney Center. However, Heather, as a part of her Extension, you know, role, has paired up with our team. So a lot of our resources are now centered within our office's page. So if you have any questions around, ADA or sign language resources or needs for interpreters, our office would, for participants, our office would be the contact for that, and we'll get you connected with Heather. So there's always a need for information in formats or in languages other than just English, and that includes also sign language. What we typically see is that with the governor's updates, for example, they're often signed, right, as a primary source of information that comes out. That reduces the amount of steps that the information needs to take to eventually get into the hands of linguistically diverse populations. But at the same time, I'm proud to say that Extension has the wherewithal and the capacity and the resources to be able to respond to your needs, whatever those needs are, as it relates to the need for sign interpreters as related to our work in Extension. So yes, for sign interpreters, there hasn't been any greater bump in requests for sign interpreters. Why? Because in many, but not all cases, individuals, even though they may be deaf or hard of hearing, are still able to read English, again, in general terms. And so the barriers that would be there for folks who are dominant in a language other than English aren't necessarily there for folks who may be deaf or hard of hearing. But we're here to support with any requests or any needs that are out there that you hear of out on the local level.
Thank you. And then I think we have time for one more question, and this is geared towards all of the panelists. Heather says, we hear a lot about self-care and caregiving, and the concept of self in some cultures is not necessarily thought of, particularly in collective cultures. When we look at compassion fatigue or burnout during our caregiving or taking care of our elders, is there a positive and appropriate way to approach that for the family or caregiver, as self-care may not even be a concept to consider?
Hello, I can say something about this. So, especially in the Latin culture, it's necessary to help the family feel comfortable, especially the caregiver, to use the services. Because most of the time, they don't ask for help until they feel very overwhelmed, and when they are unable to take it any longer, because take care for older adults can be difficult and also rewarding, right? So kind of provide bilingual information and kind of explain the importance also to ask for help. Can be in the family, like, okay, you also need some breaks. Can you ask this other, aunt to help a little bit with the older adult? Can be beneficial. Also, I want to say something like, it's not only seen as overwhelming, also there is a lot of reward to have an older adult in the family, because they also can help to take care of the younger children, and how we know childcare is very expensive. So this can be very positive in the family. Also, older adults can help with cooking, with cleaning. So this can be something positive in the family too. So it's kind of, talk to the family, talk to the caregiver, and kind of make them comfortable so they can talk about, their needs, and also we can kind of approach them and tell them about some things that they can do to feel more overwhelmed. Self-care, there is no exactly concept, but there is some ways that we can talk to the Latin family or the caregiver, that they can understand about the importance of taking care of themselves, have some breaks, and also it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah, and this is my Zhang. I just share a little bit too. I think the word self-care depends on the age group that you're talking with. So for our elders, they have been in the collective society all their life. There is no such thing as taking a break for themselves. So when you know that they are taking care of themselves and they're happy is when you watch them, knowing that they have tried their hardest to help their grandkids, their son and daughter-in-law, the best to their ability, and they have something to smile for. That's when they feel like, they have been taking care of their family and taking care of themselves, because the collectedness comes from doing something for others and help other, and then that's when you yourself have some pride. So again, it depends on the age group. For young people now, they would take more of the individual approach where, oh, I need a break to be it. Many mom I laugh at say, I just need to go to the bathroom, take a break from everyone, read a book, right? But again, older people, they won't do that. I have one mom, for example, both of her sons have lost their jobs. And so she's doing everything she could to make sure that she comes and get food from our, weekly food care boxes for them and so forth. So the concept is very different for the age group and depends on who you're talking with. It's the nature of the collectiveness. And so for us, there's no such thing as, oh, I'm going to take this time off of me and do this. And so when you work with different family, just, get to know that family and get to know what is it that they consider self-care.
I'll just add one comment, and I agree, self-care is has a very unknown definition within our population. I think because we're in a more collective population also, it's normal to say, hey, can you do dinner? Can you make, take mom and dad to the appointments? We don't really have a definition for self-care within our family. It's just, calling on each other to help out when needed. And that's how it's always been culturally, is that, we all bring to the table different skill sets, and some of us do better at doing some things than others. And so individuals step up when they're needed. And that, I think that's what makes our cultures so unique in that way.
Thank you. Well, it's just 11:30 now. I want to thank all of our presenters, Mai Zhang, Anna Karina, Dominic, Ledesma, and Dr. Carolee Dodge Francis for joining us today. I also want to thank Kristen Litzelman and Karen Dickerel, who helped me plan our professional development opportunity for today. And I just want to thank you all for joining us.